Church of Christ Center here in Hartford, Connecticut. My name is Ken Slotty. I'm the Conference Minister, and I'm here with my colleague, the Reverend Vita McCallister, who is the Associate Conference Minister for Youth and Young Adults. Day has just returned from her second trip to Ferguson, Missouri. And what I'd like to start with, Day, as a beginning question is, on this trip to Ferguson, what did you hope would happen on your trip there? What did you set out to accomplish? And I'll leave it there to begin with.
That's a really hard question to answer, largely because I was much more in touch with why I was going than what I was hoping for. And I was going because the disparities in our preparation was convicting for me as a minister of the gospel. So in the Connecticut conference, we had taken what I thought at the time was this really bold stand to invite our congregations to consider in an intentional way what we would do to prepare for the announcement from the grand jury. And that preparation included like prayer and getting all of the facts and figuring out whether your church would be a location that could host individuals regardless of what the grand jury decided. But almost immediately after we put that letter out to our churches and it was well received, there was another kind of note that was going around Facebook. And it was a note of someone on the ground in Ferguson who was preparing for the grand jury announcement. And our announcement said pray. And their announcement was like, buy a bottle of Maalox to counteract the effects of tear gas. We were saying, let's figure out whether our churches should be places where people can pray. And that note was like, buy some shin guards so that when the police advance and you fall, you won't be injured. And as I stood in what felt like a gulf between those two locations, I really felt like I needed to be on the other side of that gulf.
So given what those of us who have been here have learned about the situation in Ferguson and reading news accounts, reading stories that have been written about it, may not tell the whole story of what's actually occurring on the ground. So would you share with us what did you see people doing? What did you hear people saying in this trip?
I heard people saying consistently that Black Lives Matter. And for some people, that statement was incendiary, right? Because truly as people of faith, we believe all lives matter.
Of course.
All of us are created in the image of God. All of us have an inherent right to be treated decently and to be afforded basic human dignity. So why is it essential to make this unique claim that Black life matters? And if you make that claim, are you doing so against the claim that other lives matter? Are Black lives, therefore, more important, more valuable than other lives? That was sort of the pushback. Like, we should just say all lives matter and leave it at that. And what I found as I traveled to Ferguson is that unique statement and declaration that Black lives matter is important because it grows out of a particular context. And so that context is one in which individuals of color have a disproportionately higher probability of being harmed in interactions with the state than individuals who are not people of color. And when that happens, when a person of color has an interaction with an individual who is paid to protect and serve a community of color, they also have a disproportionately higher probability of not receiving justice based on that interaction. In other words, officers are not going to be held accountable in a court of law, which is our system, for asking the question, is what happened here appropriate, the appropriate use of deadly force? So that the specific statement about Black Lives Matter is a statement not in singularity, but in context of some systemic, cultural, and institutional problems that we have. So when I was on the ground in Ferguson, I got a chance to see those systemic issues. So as I walked through the city limits of Ferguson, it was a militarized zone. There were Humvees on corners. There were police cars in alarming numbers. There were police and National Guardsmen, it looked like preparing for warfare. I mean, you would see them drive up and back trunks would open and, you know, they're just kind of gearing up, putting on riot gear, grabbing their armaments, and the people who I was standing beside did not have any armaments. I mean, you know, what I had to protect me was a white cloth that I had purchased because they don't have any more tear gas masks in that region. I just want that to sink in for a moment. Like, I think my daughter said it best. We were engaged in a conversation with another clergywoman, Pamela Lightsey, who is a United Methodist clergy person and associate dean at Boston. And we're having this dialogue. She's got a gas mask and we're talking, we're on our way to a peaceful demonstration. And I'm saying, you know, why didn't you send me a link so I could get a gas mask? And she's saying, and we're old friends, and she's saying back, yeah, there's been a run on gas masks. And we're continuing to talk, and my daughter's in the back seat. She's like, stop like a run on gas masks. Like, where are we that there's a run on gas masks? Not that this isn't something we usually stock. They know we've gone out and stocked it and we've run out. So you're trying to juxtapose, why am I standing here with a cloth in my collar as protection? And the people who are paid to protect and serve me have on full riot gear. How is that an equal exchange? And so that's what you see in the city limits of Ferguson. But when you get in your car and you drive out of the city limits of Ferguson, we stayed in a small town called Hazelwood, which was maybe 10 minutes away. There are no Humvees. There are no police. There are no National Guardsmen. You don't see that. It's the rest of the city moving along, and it's fair exchange. What you don't hear about Ferguson is that for 108 days, 108 days, men and women from across the country have been holding nightly peaceful protests. And I want you to, 108 days, every single night, men and women are out on the streets peacefully protesting. 108 days. 2 of those 108 days have included some violence. And yet the loop that you get is as if it is lawless in the streets. And the people who have been on the streets for that 108 days are professionals. They are young people who are still in high school, in middle school. They're college students who have walked away from a semester at school because they thought this conversation was important to have. They're mothers and fathers and grandparents. There's Mama Cat who sets up across from the Ferguson police station every night and opens her van that's filled with food so that whoever is standing out there across from the station with a simple sign saying that Black Lives Matters, so that person has dinner that night. And other people come to the van, homeless people come to the van, sometimes police officers come to the van, but whoever shows up there in search of nourishment, they're able to get it. And in some ways, that's what I think this movement is about. It's providing nourishment for a community of people who haven't been able to get it for a very long time.
Would you say a word, Day, about the United Church of Christ's presence in Ferguson? I know we've got churches in the community. Would you say a word about the leadership being provided there on the ground by local clergy and what you experienced among colleagues who are right there?
I can't say enough about what clergy are doing on the ground, what members of the United Church of Christ are doing on the ground, what UCC clergy are doing on the ground. I was in an act of civil disobedience at a mall, and there was a gentleman who was right there. I mean, just, you know, singing and chanting, and my daughter saw him and introduced herself later on, and that night we were at a mass meeting at an AME church. When we're at the meeting, she comes to me and wants to introduce me to this young man because he's a member of the United Church of Christ. And she's really proud that she's finding UCC members. And this gentleman is not a clergy person, he's a member of a church. And we start talking. And we sit down in the back and we're sharing stories. He's a local educator. He's rewritten his entire curriculum to talk about Ferguson, to give his students a space. He works in a content and context that's fairly affluent. And many of the parents of those children came to him and said, we don't know how to have this conversation. Now, the majority of those parents were white, but not all of them. Mm-hmm. And they said, we don't know how to do it. Our kids are coming home with this great stuff that's happening in your class, but we don't know how to continue the conversation around our dinner table. Can you help us? So he's telling me about this and telling me about the curriculum. And a few other people come over and we're sitting and having a conversation. And someone else asked him, how are you able to do this work every week? And he starts talking about his church. Hmm. And he says, let me tell you about St. John's beloved community. And he starts talking about the Reverend Starsky Wilson. And he says, every week for at least the last 5 weeks, every sermon that I hear has a scriptural connection to what's happening in Ferguson. And he says, I'm a gay man, and I get to come to this church as an African-American man, as a gay man, and every week I am affirmed in my context. And my pastor isn't shy about affirming the work that I'm doing at the school, and he's not shy about affirming who I am as a person. And I get filled up. I mean, it's just a full-on testimony. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there, and I had planned on going to Christ the King Church, which is in Florissant, which is a community right next to Ferguson, with Tracy Blackman. Right. When Allison Buttrick Patton and I had gone in August, we went to Reverend Blackman's church. We were absolutely blown away by what we've seen and heard. She is a part of the newly formed commission and has been doing phenomenal work. So we were all set and on our way to go to that church. Mm-hmm. But the power of his testimony, the witness that he offered, all of us in that circle were like, we're going to St. John's tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And that's where we were on Sunday morning. It was the 6th anniversary for Starsky Wilson. At the end of the sermon, which was preached by another pastor, yes, he stood up and he said, this invitation to discipleship isn't individual. There's some churches that say, when you accept membership in a church, it's about you and your relationship with the divine. He said in his congregation on Sunday, mm-hmm, this is about accepting a call to be in community. And as community, we have to be a voice in the wilderness, mm-hmm, crying out for justice. Mm-hmm.
So that's very powerful. What from your experience now going twice, what are the people of Ferguson hoping for? Is there hope there on the ground, and what is that hope about, if there is hope?
First of all, there's more hope on the ground than there are boots on the ground. I mean, hope is what makes everything that's happening there possible. Mm-hmm. There's a hope and an optimism that is infectious there. It carries you as you walk on the streets, and you know that you're not alone. And you're standing there, and you're in a motorcade, you know, that's a protest for the highway, and you look across, and the plate next to yours is from Iowa or Arkansas, or you're in a conversation with someone from Michigan, or you're talking to somebody who's 86 years old and they've got their son and their grandchild in the car, and they're remembering being in a movement many, many years ago and now introducing their children to this work. And all of that is built on a hopefulness that change is possible, right? And that's what drives it. Change is possible. And at the very moment that you think, I don't know how long this is going to last, or I don't know if this is going to equal something that's tangible, another young person, and I mean a young person, starts jumping, and I mean literally jumping up and down, saying a chant. And they end every single action with this phrase: it is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win.
Duty to win.
We must love and care for each other.
Wow.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
You say that again.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and care for each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains.
So we're sitting here this afternoon in Hartford, Connecticut. Are there some tangible ways we in this conference can support the people of Ferguson in their struggle? And are there ways that we can work here in Hartford and in Connecticut as well? What are some thoughts? I know you have lots of thoughts about that.
Yes.
But how can we support our brothers and sisters in Ferguson? You've been there twice. That's one method of support. There are some other ways. What are some ways that we can do this?
There's some great things we can do. Number one, if you're a moderator in your church, you can sit down and write a letter as a moderator to a moderator at St. John's UCC in St. Louis. You can go on the website and find out his address and information. We'll provide it for you.
Yep.
You can write a letter as the head of the trustees to Christ the King and encourage them for the decisions they're making every day to open their church and the cost of that. You can write a letter. You can invite your Sunday school to create pictures and cards that you can send to the churches that are there on the ground. Those messages are empowering. They're lifted up on Sunday. They make a huge difference. Number two, you can educate yourself about what's going on. There are more independent sources right now than we've ever had in the history of our world. Mm-hmm. So you can find out about the Millennial Activists United, MAU. They're doing amazing work, young people on the ground, indigenous to St. Louis and Ferguson. You can follow people on Twitter so that you can get a firsthand account of what's happening on the ground, and you can hear those other messages. There's some things you can do financially to provide support. Number one, Pastor Lee's congregation, which is called the Flood Church, because they're flooding the community with love, was burned down not by looters. This is the senior pastor of a church that has supported the Brown family since the death of their son. This family has received hundreds of death threats since they have stood in support of their member. Those death threats included threats to burn down the church with the members in it. And a week before their church was burned to the ground, the family dog was poisoned. And so both the arson commission in the area and the pastor are clear that the burning down of this particular building was not an incidental event, but there were individuals who used the announcement as an opportunity to carry out a threat that they had been promising for many, many months. That church needs to be rebuilt, and you can send resources. A number of the other churches in the area are willing to house those resources. People like Wellspring United Methodist Church, which is pastored by Willis Johnson, have accepted being a space to receive that money. The young people that are on the ground are everyday young men and women who, like my 24-year-old daughter, are making some decisions about what gets paid in order to be present. And so there are ways that we can be financially supportive through organizations that we trust. Mm-hmm. There's handsupunited.org, so you can go on the site and do that. But here's the thing I'm going to push for, which is going to be controversial. So I want to say this is my recommendation and not one that we've had conversation
and
about.
Since this is live, this is daily.
This is mine. This is all me. Send whatever concerns you have to me. As a conference, we do a really good job of sending young people on the ground when natural disasters happen. We send our children on mission trips to help rebuild houses after Katrina. We go every year in support of Simply Smiles to help a community find a sustainable economic model for the poverty that is crushing there. We need to be sending young people on the ground to learn what it is to be an activist for Christ. Mm-hmm. It is safe in Ferguson. I have been there. Mm-hmm. You can go. Mm-hmm. You can get connected with people who are on the ground doing work. We have young people right here in Connecticut who are at the University of Connecticut who are fighting right now for justice in terms of an event that happened there involving my sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And those young people would benefit from being in dialogue and being networked with other young adults and the youth who are at the front lines of the movement. Mm-hmm. The truth is, every significant push we've ever seen for human and civil rights around the world has been led in large measure by people who are under the age of 40. Yes. They're the folks that have the energy and the courage to push back against the things that make our lives incredibly comfortable. And it is uncomfortable, and it is a different paradigm to stand behind young people when we're accustomed to standing in front of them, to listen when we're accustomed to being the ones to lead the dialogue. But I believe that's what we're being called to do. So can your church help to sponsor a group of young adults and youth in getting on the ground, because additional actions are going to be happening in Ferguson, and they need as many people as possible to be eyewitnesses, to come back and to tell what they've seen and heard and what they've done with their own hands and feet.
So we are extremely grateful to you for your witness, for your ministry that has now taken you twice. This has been your second trip to Ferguson. Our hope and plan is a couple weeks from now to have another one of these kinds of conversations, because there's much more to say and much more to tell. Mm-hmm. We'd also want to encourage our churches to be involved in our Sacred Conversations on Race ministry. There are lots of resources. Mm-hmm. Can you say a word about what some of those resources are?
Absolutely. So our churches, in the meantime, can be gathering spaces for conversation. We have a number of folks in the conference who have traveled to Ferguson. I'm not the only one. People like Reverend John Selders, who is one of our pastors, of course, at Amistad UCC, has been on the ground, is a lifelong lover, and is from St. Louis. Yes. His entire family, several generations. His wife is from St. Louis, so they understand a lot of those connections. And there are folks like Jack Davison, Allison Buttrick Patton, who have been on the ground and are willing to have conversations. So you can invite those clergy into your settings to have dialogues, to lead conversations. People like Reverend Stephen Camp and Reverend Mia Douglas have been engaged for over a year in a discourse around community violence, and already have relationships with police officers and policing agencies in the Hartford area. You can talk to them about how they constructed their ministry for youth and young adults in that area. And then in terms of the resources that we've provided, there are Advent resources that are available up on the website now, so you can introduce this discussion in the midst of our celebration of Advent and the hope that Christ brings us in the midst of change. And then, of course, there's the curriculum that we've developed for the Sacred Conversations on Race, and the very first cohort of Sacred Conversations on Race facilitators who can come to your congregation to help you have an extended dialogue.
So there's all kinds of resources available, all kinds of suggestions. Mm-hmm. Our hope is that in a couple of weeks we might have the ability to dialogue with our audience that's watching. We're working on the technological side of that to make that happen. I want to thank Eric Anderson, who's behind the camera here for our live broadcast. I wonder, Day, any last thoughts, recognizing literally yesterday you got home and this is still is fresh and being processed. Any last word, and would you close us with prayer today?
I think I'd like my last word to be the prayer.
That would be awesome.
So let's do that. Let's look to God. God, we do give you thanks and praise for this day, for another opportunity to come together as your faithful people. We lift up with gratitude the men and women, boys and girls, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, who have used their feet as your feet, their mouth as your voice for over 108 days to declare aloud that the people that you have created to populate this earth all matter, that they all deserve to be treated with dignity, and they all deserve to be treated decently, that this is a divine right you have given to us and not a civil right that we can take away. Thank you for their willingness to speak truth to power, to make us uncomfortable by reminding us that silence is an endorsement. God, we pray that you would continue to convict our hearts, that we might take the time to listen and to learn from those who live on the margins day to day. And if we find ourselves in a place, oh God, where we may speak truth in the midst of confusion, give us the courage to do so. Thank you for the witness of the Connecticut Conference of the United Church of Christ, for the resources that have been provided to stand on the side of those most vulnerable and those who are most in danger in this moment. We ask that you would continue to strengthen our resolve to be present. And now, God, for those who do not understand this witness, who are uncomfortable with these words, for those who fear that we have painted a picture too broadly that indicts men and women who serve and protect every day, we ask that you would create tables where we might join together just like they do around Mama Cat's van. Receive a word of nourishment from your text and gospel that tells us that a day will come when the lion and lamb will lay down together. So whether we see ourselves in this moment as lion or lamb, we pray, God, for the day where we may live together in peace, because justice is present. Amen.
Amen.